Hello, Battleground readers. It's Mrs. Castro. I'm going to be reading Arnie the Doughnut, cooked up by Lori Keller. This book was signed by the author to my family, the Castro family. Arnie turned out to be just the kind of donut he hoped to be. Chocolate covered with bright colored candy sprinkles. Look at all my sprinkles. There must be 1,000,000 of them. He was made very early in the morning at the downtown bakery, home of the best donuts around. Arnie was proud to be one of the best. He knew that people all over town made special trips to his bakery to buy donuts of their very own. As Arnie sat on the tray, which had just been placed in the donut case, he took a moment to reflect on the amazing things that had happened to him in the morning. He was, number 1, cut into a ring. Number 2, deep fried. Number 3, cooled. Number 4, iced. Number 5, sprinkled. And number 6, named. Perry says, I remember that. Arnie looked around and saw all sorts of donuts sitting nearby. Howdy, Frenchie, powdered, the Long John, the chocolate zebra, jelly filled, cinnamon twist, donut holes. It's not brain, silly, it's jelly. Because they said, ew, his brains are oozing out. This is an eclair, an apple fritter, glazed, plain, iced chocolate, cream-filled, various muffins, and a bear claw. He tried to strike up a conversation with an apple fritter on the next tray over, but she didn't seem to want to talk. How about that, deep fryer? Any relations to Larry Fritter? Want to count my sprinkles? It is rather early. Maybe she's not a morning donut, Arnie supposed. It was 6 a.m. and the baker had just hung the open sign in the window. Arnie was fascinated as he watched customers stream into the bakery. One by one, donuts were chosen, placed in paper bags, and whisked away with their new owners. Some went by the dozen in giant boxes. Goodbye, Arnie yelled to each donut. Have a great trip. This is so exciting. I wonder who will choose me. Number 105. Donuts make good wheels. Just then, Arnie looked up and saw a man pointing right at him. Moi? Thank you, Mr. Bing. Have a nice day. Before he could say another word, he was pulled from the tray and placed into a paper bag of his very own. Mr. Bing, that's a fine name, Arnie decided. I can hardly wait to meet him. The grand exit that Arnie imagined. The ride to Mr. Bing's apartment was a little bumpy. Arnie was grateful for the soft napkin the baker had so thoughtfully placed underneath him in the bag. Bumpy humps. Clumps of bumps. Why does he keep me in this bag, Arnie wondered. He had never ridden in a car and wished he could look out the window to see all of the sights, but more than anything, he wished he could meet Mr. Bing. Finally, the car came to a stop, and they were home. Mr. Bing carefully removed Arnie from his paper bag and placed him on a clean, shiny plate. What a handsome plate, Arnie said to himself. I'm not crazy about the design. I prefer more of a modern look, but it's nothing like a little paint can't fix. Mr. Bing gently lifted Arnie from his new plate. Isn't that cute, thought Arnie, as he closed his eyes and smiled. He wants to hold me. As Arnie relaxed in Mr. Bing's hand, he felt himself moving higher and higher away from his plate. When he opened his eyes to see where he was going, he discovered that he was headed straight for Mr. Bing's open mouth. What are you doing? Shouted Arnie. Mr. Bing was stunned. He dropped Arnie back onto his plate. I was going to eat you, he replied. Eat me, Arnie shrieked. His sprinkles flying everywhere. Why would you do a thing like that? Did you make a habit of eating all your house guests? No, of course not. So then why did it suddenly occur to you to eat me? Arnie demanded. Well, because you're a donut. That's what donuts are for. Do you mean to tell me you've done this before? Yes, I eat donut every day, Mr. Bing said sheepily. Arnie froze. He felt sick and frightened and angry. He thought to himself for a moment, I must put a stop to this right away. I'll call the bakery and warn the others, whoever's left, that is. Arnie knew there was no time to waste, and then he nodded to be very sneaky in order to keep his plan away from Mr. Bing. He turned to Mr. Bing and said in his sweet voice, Excuse me, but I don't believe we've been properly introduced. My name is Arnie. Hello, Arnie, Mr. Bing stammered. I'm Mr. Bing. It's nice to meet you. Mr. Bing, would you be a dear and allow me to use your telephone? Arnie asked extremely politely. Well, okay, said Mr. Bing. Then he handed Arnie the phone. As quickly as he could, Arnie dialed the number on the bakery. The baker answered, Downtown Bakery, home of the best. Mr. Bakerman, Arnie frantically whispered. This is Arnie the Donut. Do you remember me? You made me at 5:15 this morning, and I was bought about 20 minutes ago by a man who goes by the name Mr. Bing. Yes, Arnie, the baker answered. What can I do for you? Now, I don't want to alarm you, but just moments ago that man tried to eat me. And not only that, he claims to have eaten hundreds of us. I'm going to make a run for it, but I wanted to warn you so that if you see him coming into the bakery again, you can stop him. Oh my, Arnie, I thought you understood. That's why I make donuts. For people to eat. I can't believe it, Arnie gasped. Are the other donuts aware of this arrangement? Well, I think so, the baker said. Let me ask them to make sure. Showing signs of donut shock. The baker yelled to the other donuts, Do you donuts know you're going to be eaten? Yes, we know, the donuts shouted back. We're delicious. People love us. Did you hear that, Arnie? The baker asked. Arnie was crushed. The phone dropped from his hand. He'd heard all he needed to hear. Arnie forgot all about his plan to escape. He collapsed back onto the plate, glanced at Mr. Bing and muttered, All right then, let's get this over with. Go ahead and eat me. Mr. Bing gazed down at Arnie. I'm not going to eat you, Arnie, he said reassuringly. I just wouldn't feel right about it now. Really, Arnie said, with a huge sigh of release. Well, I'm going to see that you've come to your senses. But since I'm not going to eat you, Mr. Bing continued, I'll have to figure out something else to do with you. I paid good money for you. I don't want to be wasteful. Of course not, Arnie agreed. What we need to do is each make a list of things I can do with you instead of eating you. Between the two of us, I know we'll come up with something. Good plan, Mr. Bing, Arnie said. This will be a breeze. I bet I'm good at a lot of stuff. They both feverishly wrote down their ideas. When they were finished, Mr. Bing asked, Would you like to read yours first? Sure thing, Mr. Bing, Arnie answered. Things Mr. Bing can do with me instead of eating me. Do you need a ballroom dance partner? No, I don't dance. You could use a personal fitness trainer. I'd get too sweaty. How about a portrait painter? Oh, heavens no. Would you like me to entertain at the parties? I don't like throwing parties. I could be your chauffeur, but you can't see over the steering wheel. I'd make a great bodyguard. Who could you protect me from? A cookie? Alrighty, Mr. Bing, let's hear what you came up with. Okie dokie, he replied. I just know you'll like some of these. Things I can do with Arnie instead of eating him. I could use as a pincushion. Oh, that's too painful. How about an air freshener for my car? How about not? Would you like a picture frame? I don't imagine so. I need a new bowling ball. Well, don't look at me. You'd make a fine paperweight. Boring. Then what about a doorstop? Try again. But then there was nothing else Mr. Bing's list. They were both completely out of ideas. Arnie and Mr. Bing were exhausted. They felt terribly disappointed. After a few minutes of awkward silence, Mr. Bing finally spoke. I'm sorry, Arnie, but it's clear that we can't agree on anything for you to do around here. This is difficult for me to say, but I think it would be best if you found another home. I know, said Arnie, fighting back tears. I'll just be on my way. Is it all right if I keep this napkin to pack up my loose sprinkles? Of course, Mr. Bing replied. As soon as I get a job, I'll pay you back the money you spent on me. That's not necessary, Arnie. Arnie shook Mr. Bing's hand and thanked him for his kindness. Mr. Bing opened the door and Arnie left. He paused and said, I guess donuts really are only good for eating, aren't they? They both waved goodbye and Arnie was gone. Mr. Bing stood at the window and watched Arnie walk away. He walked past the flower beds, the mailboxes, the apartment manager's office. Remember how happy I was at the beginning of this story? He passed the tennis courts, the swimming pool, the clubhouse. But when Arnie's reached the No Dogs Allowed sign at the end of the driveway, Mr. Bing suddenly came up with a new idea. No dogs allowed? Is that a donut? Yeah, whatever anyway. About my trip abroad. Arnie, wait up! Yelled Mr. Bing. He ran after him. Arnie turned back and stopped. When Mr. Bing caught up with him, he was out of breath. I can't believe I didn't think of this earlier, Mr. Bing panted. Arnie, I've always wanted a dog and could never have one because they aren't allowed here. But there's no sign that says no donuts allowed. Arnie peeked up when he realized what Mr. Bing was thinking. Would you like to take walks and play fetch? Mr. Bing asked excitedly. You bet I would. Can you do tricks like rolling over? Rolling over? Look at me. I was made for rolling over. Well then, there's only one thing left to ask. Arnie, will you be my dog donut? My donut dog? Oh, Mr. Bing, I would love to be your donut dog. From that moment on, Arnie and Mr. Bing were inseparable. Arnie liked being a donut dog even better than he liked being a donut. Get it, Arnie? I got the deluxe package. He went through a short phase of chewing on furniture and barking at the mailman, but after a crash course in obedience school, he graduated first in his class. Even when the two of them went, people would stop to pet Arnie. No one had ever seen a donut dog before. I loved that. Arnie got a napkin. Congratulations, Arnie. You're so sticky. Yes, you are. Arnie and Mr. Bing had so much fun together. Arnie was the best pet Mr. Bing could ever have hoped for, and Mr. Bing was Arnie's best friend. Beware of dog. Beware of donut.